Hey everybody, this is P from the Spinner Rack, and today, since we did some videos talking about, I think Keith Giffen talking about the accessibility of the Legion, that it was a title that was always accessible to new readers, that readers could come in and pick it up, and kind of trying to say that when 1986 happened, it became inaccessible, right? Even though it was one of DC's most popular titles, and then people use the fact that it's been the hardest to keep going since that part. But which is not really the case with this with the Legion, right? Because if you look at the first story, right, the first story has the Legion, and this is probably the easiest to read, most accessible story you could get. It has the characters' names on their chests so you can understand who they are. Easy to remember when you can just look at the page and read it, right? And the storyline basically has a cool sort of intro because anyone can get that this is a club and they're rejecting Superboy. So I always say, like, what's the name? It's American Idol. Um, you also have a nice intro cover. You see these kids and Superboy. You're surprised as they're as powerful as me in their own way. You have this hook into the story that these kids know who Superboy is, and the hook of it is that they're from the future, so they know everything from the future. And they go and they take Superboy to the future, and he marvels at all of the the futuristic stuff, and that kind of draws from the World's Fair. Like comics is very much, especially anything from like the was it Citizen Kane and the World's Fair, really kind of are the backdrop of superhero comic books. So that's what the Legion in the future is kind of trying to stress all of the marvels people saw in the World's Fair, right? So it's not as we've gone to the future, we've gotten to the future. We didn't get to see all the stuff that they said would happen, but and not in the same way. Some of it was very clunky, and there's aspects here of them not getting everything right, which they're not supposed to, right? But it's very clean, clear storyline. They challenge Superboy to try to become a member. He, for some other reason, doesn't make it, even though he tries his best. But it was only a ruse, and they give him honorary member, and also giving him a reward. So he's it's a very simple, easy, accessible story. Now, Superboy, it became, but it was only a one issue thing. They hadn't planned on doing a bunch more. It wasn't going to become part of Superboy's mythology. The thing that would happen is that it was a successful issue. So with any success, you then decide, I'm going to do more of that book, right? So the Legion started coming back, right? And then at some point, the Legion, because Superboy at some point gets his own title, the Legion take over Adventure Comics. They don't tend to take it over forever. And at this point, this storyline is from Adventure Comic Books, of Mordru the Merciless. It's a great splash page, and I was going to use this to show you classic Silver Age storytelling. But when I look through it, it's not as easy to kind of figure out what's going on, right? We do, just looking at it, something's happened to Superboy. So there's a mystery, there's this looming figure. There's some jumps here. So a lot of things you need a caption to see, and to understand this is a time machine, it's time cube. A lot of things is happening for you to get, and you get that it is, but it's not as simple as clear as the first storyline. So they're dealing with multiple characters, very in-depth plot that Jim Shooter was writing. This is Jim Shooter, Curt Swan. So you have these classic storytellers, and you had this story. It starts with a mystery, what happened to Superboy, and then you find out about Mordru and his history, and everything happened as sort of the backstory, and it's like have him at this whole entire history, right? And then Mordru breaks out. This leading how Superboy got hurt, right? And of course, Superboy always used to stress his weakness to magic, right? And he hurts Superboy, and they run out of there. So we get caught up to speed, and then now we get back to sort of the classic storytelling, right? We got a flashback to tell us everything about him, and then we get to sort of interesting paneling. So we get a little Neal Adams stuff going on in here. So it's not as simple as trying to show you this and say this is easy to understand type of thing, and that's why I've been kind of not doing this one, even though I like the story. It's a lot of things, just like we had this flood. You don't have anything basically established to simply to show you how this stuff is happening. This is kind of moving you towards the future of storytelling, but it kind of gets back to it from time to time. We sort of get back to it when there was a lot of stuff, and right here is where the story gets kind of easier to understand, even though there's Light Lass has blue skin, and some of the makeup comes off of her. But right here, this sequence is pretty understandable, right? I'm not sure if this would hold up a truck, but you understand what happened, right? These two cars coming together. We have, she has one foot to his side, and they miss each other, right? And then we get sort of these. So I'm not sure. I think Jim Shooter probably would flip out these days by some of the paneling. And Mordru is free, and he's back in this time, right? So this gives you an idea. I think that took up the entire Adventure comic books, right? Oh, so while we're here, I went too quickly, right? So we had, now when this is much later, like at some point the Legion loses, Supergirl is put into Adventure comic books, and the Legion is out of the book, right? So I think that's when the Legion Outpost did their letters, and they decided, all right, we're gonna give some time to the Legion in the backup of Superboy, right? I think it's after 156 or 150 something. It's like there's a gap in between the time they were in Adventure and by the time they got to Superboy. And one of the things that happened, even though they were always drawn as kids, as you saw earlier, once Dave Cockrum came on the book, kind of got them to, whether they weren't, mid-teens, they were kind of high school students. And he kind of sexed up some of the outfits. Obviously, Saturn Girl, she got a really nice outfit. And is there anyone else I could say? Princess Projecta, Shrinking Violet. And I think Dream Girl doesn't, her just body gets a little, more voluptuous. And Saturn Girl gets a sexier outfit. So that kind of gets them to kind of grow up, right? So, but he did very clean and clear storylines, right? And he kind of understood I don't have one of them here. I wish I did. But, I think I'll try to show you some images of how Dave kind of brought his thing. And he was good with group dynamics and kind of with the way Neal Adams would do it, where you kind of suggest, the same way the first issue kind of suggested, Marvel and DC would kind of use that, but I think he's a very clean and clear storyteller. So, but as time went on, like Neil Adams' approach kind of crept into the book, right? So you can see that I mentioned that before with the Legionist period by Mike Grell, right? So we get a little more dynamic page. We get some nice locales, that sort of thing. So it's taking where at some point this could be Superman though. That's one of the things when I bring up Neil Adams is like, even though Kirby had grown out of doing kids as kids, DC wasn't the same exactly. Even though they did a story where they showed the adult Legion as adults. These are supposed to be still teens, but they're getting married, stuff like that. And so it's like clearly suggesting that these guys are like 18 years old. And this is a story where time has been changed. And always pointed out that they can be used to kind of have, if people had issue with 86, they could have used this kind of storyline to do it, right? But this is showing these guys are like, more like what was it, like Grease? If you look at Grease, or what's that other show? Travolta. These kind of adults, TV adults, right? TV kids, right? Where the kids are either short and in their 20s, or in their 20s and they're playing kids, like the Sweat Hogs, right? Well, so there we go. We got in this more of adult thing, and we get this what we would know as X-Men type of storytelling, the action, these grown things, these locales, and the storytelling is pretty simple to understand. There's nothing too, you can understand what's going on in the story without reading it. So you could say it's definitely accessible, right? So, but not in the way an early comic book would, not in the way Curt Swan would do it when he first was doing the Legion, right? So I wanted to, I think I should show you some other stuff, but I was going to show you, no, I don't have it here. Right, no way to see. So I'm going to jump ahead, right? Because we had Jim Starlin, who kind of did like they're pretty much grown. Like there's, even though he had some struggles with DC, his things are fully muscular, strong heroes. James Sherman. Was there anyone else? I do have him here. I have Jimmy James. And I like Jimmy James, and I already understood the Kirby dynamic of these muscular sort of heroes. I think if we open up here, these guys, like Lightning Lad is like massive. Now, people had issue with Jimmy James, but when I saw this book, I redrew it. I redrew images from this book all the time. I really enjoyed this book. And I did a video on this already, right? So it's this is very DC though. It has, like Marvel wouldn't do science like this, where there's a chain around the world, but it's clear. It's clear. I mean, a little tight, but there's a lot of characters. It's a little cluttered, but definitely, but in that accessibility being that it's not a one-issue story, it's a three-issue story. It's a three-part story. This is a three-part story. This is a feature-length novel, but this was something specifically made for the Treasury edition, right? So we're getting away from the single issues, and we're doing multiple part stories, where even though Jim Shooter says all the stuff that Jim Shooter tells people at Marvel not to do, he's doing it in this issue, right? So we're going to step ahead, right? So I showed you Jimmy James. I'm gonna show you the artist that before Keith Giffen got on the book. I think Keith Giffen does the backup feature here, right? So in this issue, and it shouldn't be on these two books, but I don't have anything else to show, right? And they're on a hospital station, and we see the Legion in trouble. Now, a lot of times, DC would do covers, like Marvel would do covers that were symbolic covers, but they were close to what was in the book. DC would do covers that were really interesting, but sometimes they wouldn't live up to the book. Now, this scene isn't in the book. I think it's something close to it, but at the same time, I think the issue lives up to the story. So I think in the Legion, it was it wasn't really a Marvel book because it has characters with no masks on, but it was definitely this period had great covers and storylines with, and this comes to them in the, in this where they kind of, what is it, the wall of heroes, right? So it's a simple thing, right, where you have Bouncing Boy, and he's reflecting on his time, his status in the Legion, right? And we have sort of a Marvel dynamic, a cool thing of him throwing the Legion ring. And so it's setting up a bunch of things. We set up his power, that he's Bouncing Boy, and it's clean and clear storytelling, right? Then we have an establishing shot here. So this is kind of I always call this kind of Marvel storytelling. So we have a little tension over here, right? We have this, the emotion. We haven't really seen this type of emotion in this book yet, right? This sort of thing where we have him having this tense moment and the attitude change, right? And then we get to here. Now, this is the Legion Hall, so there's a bunch of Legionnaires, right? But it's using, I think what Neal Adams kind of said, using your head to kind of figure out what's going on here, so that there's more people than suggested. And it's used the same way in the first Legion, but there's a lot, we know the Legion now. So I could probably list all of these guys, right? But we have the front of the table. We don't see Wildfire here, and we don't see him here, but this suggests that there's more people and it's a longer table, right? So we see him look across the table to here. Somewhere they have possibly on this other side has was it Sunboy, and he hits chair. So it's giving you the idea what kind of table it is. It might be like a diamond, I'm not sure, but you're getting the image in your head to kind of flesh out the rest of this, right? So it's pretty clear, right? Then we get to see the other side. Got Colossal Boy over here, right? Sun Boy, and then Bouncing Boy comes in here, connecting what was going on before to this next scene. And then we get a nice wide here, establishing what the table is actually like. So we can fill in the blanks and it gets kind of clear, right? And something happens on the screen. All right. And then there's at this med lab, we got these guys who break in, right? But as they break in, we have Timberwolf that bounces around. Now, Paul Levitt, and this is not anything, at this point, he really figured out how to manage the Legion, right? So he's coming back after a great run before this, and now there's a ton of characters, but you can see how he's able to manage these characters and have these moments, having this moment of action, having moments of them in trouble, and then we have Timberwolf going to action and Light Lass with him, right? And we see Light Lass, she kind of was trying to handle something, but she is taken out. But these guys are still stealing, and the rest of the Legion show up, and they're about to handle this thing. And they see these guys, and they make short work of them, right? And then we're talking to Karate Kid, right? So they talk to him. He's planning on a leave of absence, but he hopes to be back soon. Him and Princess Projecta, right? And this story been following Bouncing Boy, and we have Dream Girl show up. So this is where I first met Dream Girl, and immediately fell pretty hard for her, right? And we have Dual Damsel. She is a little upset, but it's just fun. And this is moving away from having all the bickering, even though Wildfire is obviously kind of the character who's always going to be at odds with people, or people be at odds with him. But we have this classic thing, and then Legion also, handling business. We get a little more of the dynamic of the team, and at the same time, for some reason, Timberwolf needs to change, go back the way he looked, because he used to look like the regular Legionnaires, right? And this is a subplot leading into the next story, I believe. Right, so I think I had this off the stands, right? As a kid, or my mother bought it for me. And you have this moment where Lightning Lad is cooking, but then turns into a tender moment after his food is terrible. And then we have this cool thing, and he's turned normal. And we have this crazy monster that's here. A really wacky looking monster that can absorb powers. And we have Timberwolf, who we've seen in action before, jumps into action, right? And then we have almost like a Star Wars type thing where they're playing and they see, something's going on. The med lab, that's where they're at. Oh, sorry, I probably mixed it up. Right, so it's pretty clean, clear type of storyline. So there was talk that he was going to possibly take over the book, but at the same time, we had another artist come in, who was Keith Giffen. I'm not sure if he did he did do the cover, right? So, and this is where the dynamic of the book changes. Like, the book changes, and I don't mean in a bad way. It's still the same dynamic that we've seen with the Neil Adams approach, even the Kurt Swan towards the later point of that adventures. We're going to see in a cover where we set these things up. It's going to live up. The action inside is going to live up to the cover, right? So we saw Karate Kid, and they're stuck in some sort of cell, right? And I bought this off the stand just like this. No precursor, no understanding of why they're in here. But I understood comics well enough, and the art was easy to understand, even though it was a little, it's not always clear. The action is clear. There's a lot of wide shots, right? He's doing a lot of wide shots, more so than what, similar to what Jim Shooter would have Mike Zeck do in the Secret Wars, but it works a lot better here, right? So we having the same emotion, Prince Projector, the emotion that Pat Broderick was doing, but at the same time, we're getting a lot more wides, right? We get full shots of the characters, right, from different angles and whatnot, right? And then we have a lot of these graphic effects that he's been doing, and we see how he handles the Legionnaire table. It's the same way establishing there's more stuff on the other side, but it's a little wider here, right? So Pat Broderick would work on Firestorm instead. So Keith Giffen, they say at times they would work kind of Marvel style, and he kind of give Keith Giffen the plot. He would read it, but he would kind of just draw what he wanted, and Paul Levitt, who was cool with it. He always felt it was a synergy, and so yeah, when we're going through this, I think who is it? I'm not going to explain. I should explain it, but I'm not going to explain only because we're trying to do storytelling. So this is setting up with something like this going on. But here we go, another extreme wide, right? And we hadn't seen that even by right, a wide here showing established shot of this castle. They're going to help, I think, right? And we have these two captured, right? Under this fire, right? So see, another extreme wide. This is just working brilliantly for the team. So it's like, even though there's a lot happening, and it doesn't follow all the rules of story. You know, obviously, in moments they do, but at the same time, it's easier to understand because it's wider, right? So it's he uses a lot of wides and a lot of cool effects. It makes it seem like there's more things going on, big space scenes, and also these cool effects here. Like he's doing all this stuff. And something's happened to Chameleon Boy, right? But he's suggesting this kind of is as cool as a cover. Like the Legion's their outposts, their headquarters, this sort of vast establishing shot of it. It's like a lot of things where he just stays wide, right? He's not killing himself to try to go close to make tension. And you see Princess Projector, but then get hit, but she's saying something. But at the same time, we see what's happened to the other heroes that Lightning Lad is struggling with, right? They're stuck in the cold, right? And their rings are not working, and they're not sure they're going to get off of here, right? So it's a bit tense time, but we had this tender moment between two people that already have someone. Saturn Girl is married, and we have Timberwolf, who's connected with Light Lass. So they're both connected to Lightning Lad and Light Lass, right? So we see Chameleon Boy, even though it's not simply clear, but as a kid, I had no problem understanding this. You see him working on some stuff on a ship, and he sees the person he's attracted to, Shrinking Violet. She's with Colossal Boy, right? So as they're captured, we see Dream Girl go to work, right? And this book, I always talk about Marvel kind of being the 80s ladies makeover, where they were kind of becoming more independent women. Kind of outside of obviously Jean Grey is one of the first, so that would be the 70s. And you had Ms. Marvel, who was kind of a go-getter. And the Legion would take that same nod with the female heroes, right? So Dream Girl, even though people forgot, even the Great Darkness Saga, Dream Girl is a center figure in that. She's the leader of the team, right? And stuff like that, right? So we have another, like the way the X-Men would do at times, we have another wide where, and Keith Giffen would do this on the Defenders, right? And we get these nice shots and we get to see a lot of heroes in action, a lot of wides, and this dynamic. And I'm showing you this stuff to kind of show you how. So Princess Projector, obviously she gets her throne back when she's been captured. She's so happy, she faints. And then she takes her lead and she has Karate Kid as a consort, right? So he will be out of the book for a little while, right? So we had that dynamic. I'm just going to quickly show you something in Darkness Saga, like a great cover, those darkness things, which kind of used for, what's the name? And then another extreme wide, right? So he would do a lot of these establishing shots. You would see almost a good portion of the figures, or, torso to shoulder type of thing. A lot of characters on the page, a lot of wides. that sort of thing. And I think Kirby, he would do this more in the 50s of using wides to doing these establishing shots on small panels, which is harder to do smaller things, but it's like pretty clean and clear. But these extreme wides that he's using was a dynamic to the team. And I think he gets closer as the run goes on when the start gets a new title. But at the same time, it works going that extreme wide when you have a ton of characters, right? So that's why I haven't really killed myself on saying in these other two issues, you don't really see Superboy in the title, right? He is in this one, but there's so many characters to manage, right? To have it like he's your Wolverine and he has to be in every issue is something that can become a hindrance, right? Especially for someone who's in Smallville in the past, right? Same for Supergirl, who they're trying to finally catch heat, but it's not doing, no matter what they do, it's not working out. But I do like the dynamic between Supergirl and Brainiac 5. The only problem is that they did a movie, and I think they missed the point of the Legion. The Legion is kind of a club, and that's the thing that you have to remember. Not a military training group. They're a club of kids. That's why you have them rejecting people, saying you can't be in the club type of thing. That's why you have Legion of substitute legionnaires and guys who couldn't make it, that sort of thing. But you have so many characters, you don't want to get stuck at the same time, which they weren't. Superboy went away. DC was okay with it, right? Because they tried to have Superboy as a book which was now if Byrne had done a Superboy book, it probably would have sold well. He was drawing it more so, but Byrne with his work schedule, he probably would have had Kurt Swan do it. And we've had I've argued with retailers on Facebook who said, when I saw Kurt Swan drawing the Earth Stealers, I ordered less. So I'm going to show you why I struggled with it. Because I showed you the issues that I had, right, as a kid, that I bought at the stands. I showed you some issues that I didn't have. I showed you the dynamic. I showed you what would be considered this period that's sort of accessible. And you see the storytelling is like any comic book. It's not following how the first set of stories went. It got heavily involved the same way you'd look at the X-Men. I would say even before the X-Men, the only difference is that we have Neil Adams who kind of did it first. He gave us this sort of dynamic of adult heroes that were actually teens. So to say that, Paul Levitt is taking the book. He was successful enough to get a Baxter title, right? So they had a regular title on the Baxter title. They also had Legionnaire 3. They also had some later reprints that was done by Giffen, which was the Legion in present day. They were just sort of like they were called Legion, which was but it was an acronym. So we had this thing, they would be kind of the precursor to the Legion. So we get to Paul Levitt leaving. The book is a success, but he's like, I want to give it to Keith Giffen. Levitt's leaving. I want to give it to Keith Giffen, and he would take over. Now, Keith Giffen is kind of at the top of his power, right? He's been a success at DC for a long time. He started up the Omega Men, even though it didn't last when it first started. It's pretty big. He was doing the Justice League. He had maybe 2 titles of the Justice League out. They were giving Aquaman. He did I guess it's a reboot of Aquaman, a reboot of Green Lantern. He's kind of the go-to guy outside of Byrne on Superman, right? So we open up this. It's 5 years later from with some of the stuff I was showing you. And the dynamic is totally changed, right? And I know this is a heavily sci-fi book, but it's kind of taking the Watchmen approach. In the panels, in the gap of the storyline of saying something happened, something terrible happened, we don't have the Legion anymore, right? Symbol of happier time. And the death of Lightning Lad, all this stuff is happening. And at the same time, we start, because they were always going by their last names, so we get the news reporter aspect that you see in The Dark Knight. We get all that sort of storytelling, and then we get in the Legion, which is not really the Legion's dynamic, but he's kind of doing we have Cosmic Boy, known as his name Rock, right? And we're supposed to kind of decode this, right? So it's kind of a talking head book. So I think that what I struggle, even though I'm not sure, I think this was initially a success, but soon after they would be, I think Mary and Tom and Mary Birnbaum, they were longtime Legion fans who were scripting it. They would take the book and they would kind of make it a little back to where it was, right? In the late 80s, right? Even though they didn't have Superboy, we had this new origin, right? And Kurt Swan doing the cover here, and we have Keith Giffen doing this other one here. So we get the new origin of them. And we have, when Giffen is doing it, he's keeping this dynamic, because even at the end there's like text to read. So it had much a Watchmen thing. If something happened, and why the Legion aren't here. But I think this is Chris Sprouse. It gets back to regular storytelling, right? Just regular comic storytelling, a little bit, with the panel over panel stuff that you see, Todd McFarlane do, but it was done by many artists, Byrne, whoever, right? I'm giving you the simple history. It's not as clean as clear as the early stuff, but ultimately, little history of Marvel. We have these characters that save the day, and the moment's hero, and they become the Legion, right? So they kind of enlisted, right? And they slowly develop things and that sort of stuff, and they start going out and saving the world, or saving the universe, rather, right? So, and then we get back to the regular storyline, which that was a breath of fresh air in it. And then we have, as we go on, we have these magazine things, which are like the, what's next? So I just want to show you, when you look at this sort of book, I think there's a quote where we have quoted to say, keeping the book accessible so anyone could kind of pick it up, that it was always an accessible title. And I would say, Superman, Batman, any of the DC titles were always accessible books. I think that, but you had a book that was utilizing all the stuff that the X-Men were using, that Marvel was using, and we kind of, lost that dynamic when we got to the 5 years later. Now, I guess for a last tidbit, at some point I'm going to do this, but it's so hard to do a Perez one in the thing. And I kind of wish he always did a classic storyline, But this is the overly cluttered, gorgeous book, right? And we have the White Witch and Rock. So this is one of the great moments here. Like this page, if we could get rid of all this other stuff and had a simple story and get rid of all the different versions of the Legion, because this was, man, this is a great book. It's gorgeous. I might have to get the trade of this if they have a large one, but I just kind of wish Perez got to do a Legion story, a classic Legion story, right? But Geoff Johns would do a Crisis Legion story. So that's going to be it for my video. I think so. Let's keep the talks going on, because my thing for the Legion is, now I will say 5 years later didn't kill the Legion. The redos and like the Birnbaums making them younger, they had some buzz around the title. But then when the next person would come, Mark Waid would come, they would be grown up again. Then the next person, it would be changed again. Then the book was even harder to read, right? They would have the name tag next to the people saying the person's name, and they would just move on with this like story. So it's like the Legion, in my mind, kind of need, any book for really success needs like 3 years, right? And it's hard to do that these days because nobody stays and fans follow creators, right? So in my mind, any of these runs outside the Birnbaums did a great job. They made it back. They brought the book back. The only problem was that the comic book crashed. So this books that were successful, like the Legion, the Titans, they're not remembered as titles that were selling from the 80s to the early 90s, right? Was X-Men, Todd, Spider-Man, and Punisher. That's where people look at, and whatever hot book was out at the time, right? So in my mind, the crash really kind of killed the Legion. We never had anyone who, outside the Birnbaums, who were really Legion fans. We do have Geoff Johns' obviously he did the Legion of Three Worlds and he did Secret Origin, but we should have gotten the Johns and Manapul long run of issues, right? Because Manapul did some decent art on his Legion run. I just don't think it was as clear, and the storyline wasn't as strong as Shooter's older runs. But if you had Johns and them doing a simple sort of Legion story where they fight, the Fatal Five and come up with something else, I'm not sure if you needed to have the Legion go back to Smallville, because you have that in the story where they fight the mob. It's not as dynamic as fighting in the future, because the Legion, when they go in, the Legion dynamic from the first one is kind of a world sphere, world, space, and all that stuff. So that's just my thought on accessibility of comic books, because when you look at the book like the X-Men, it's totally inaccessible, but it was a totally successful book. And Legion, at the same time, as great as it was a book for comic fans. And at the same time, I was a kid, I bought off the stands like this one. And I showed you the other ones that I got because it was my mother taking me to the store when she could. So I was in the middle of all of these storylines. So I'm not saying it's a bad work. This one is the only one that's is the beginning, middle, and end in this story and the subplot, right? This one is the story in the middle. This is a 3-issue gap, 4-issue gap, and then, this is like a 5-issue gap of the books that I had as a kid, right? Or whatever budget I had for comics, right? Maybe that's a better way to put it. So it's just jumping around of when I had these books, and they're all different storylines. And I said the only one that was a story middle, the beginning, middle, end is this one, and that wasn't, as a kid coming in, I was all for it, right? I totally understood it. So it's and I didn't have Superboy. I had Superboy in this one, but Superboy doesn't think he's Superboy in here. So, you know, figure that out, right? I think so yeah, I mean, I don't mean that as a bad thing of saying it's not accessible. I just think there's a dynamic, a comic dynamic that kind of was lost when it became 5 years later, which was more of a Watchmen aspect. But at the same time, I don't think that killed it. I think the comic crash kind of killed it. So that's about it. Spin rack out.